Hello, and welcome to this free video, Keeping Your Spirits Up When Your World is Upside Down. I'm psychologist and author Dr. Paul Coleman, and I'm delighted that you could join me. What does it mean to keep your spirits up? We've all heard that phrase before. Usually people think it means, well, be positive and be hopeful and keep chugging away at whatever's going on. But to keep your spirits up is really a deeper concept than that. Because the spiritual part of us, the higher level part of us, is what we really want to tap into when we're going through a very challenging time. It could be a loss, a breakup of a relationship, or a health challenge that's really knocking us down, or the loss of a loved one. A good analogy might be this. You're standing in front of the river and you walk in and your feet are in the mud and everything is kind of slow and sluggish right there. That represents the negative emotions, the frustration, the hurt, the anger, the loss, the worry. But if you venture farther out, what you notice is that there's a stronger current willing to take you. That current represents the higher level qualities, the spiritual qualities that you want to tap into when you're going through a very challenging time. And then in that current, you're stepping into the current of everybody else who's in that current, everybody else who's in that positive frame of mind. Things like gratitude, hope, faith, trust, compassion, forgiveness, peace, love. Those are the kinds of things you want to tap into while you're going through a difficult time. And let's talk about exactly how to do that. I remember when I was 15 years old, now this is a sad story, it starts out sad, but it ends up very uplifting if you can wait to the end of this video. When I was 15 years old, I woke up on a Monday morning and there had been a blizzard overnight, so we didn't have to go to school. Of course, I was thrilled. But at 9 o'clock, the phone rang, and it was my older sister who's married, has several kids. And she said that overnight, her youngest son, Tony, had passed away. Now, all the kids had had colds that week and the sniffles, and Tony was coming down with a cold as well. But overnight, it turned into what turned out to be pneumonia. And they drove to the hospital in this blizzard because the ambulance couldn't get through. And Tony passed away in my sister's arms. Now, how does anybody get through that? How does anybody keep their spirits up when their world has turned completely upside down? Well, I've worked with a lot of people over the years who've told me stories of their adversities. And I've discovered what that is that they do. And I've helped people try to get through those times. One way that people try to do, but often have difficulty with, is they try to be positive. They try to tell themselves positive thoughts. Now, we've all done that, and it's a wonderful thing to do. But have you ever struggled with that? Have you ever told yourself a positive thought only to have that followed by a counter thought that's more negative? Maybe you're regretting your past. Oh, if only I had done this, my relationship would have lasted. And then you try to tell yourself a positive thought. Well, maybe I'll find somebody new. But then you go back to the negative thought. But what if I don't? Or you're worried about the future. How am I going to get through because of this loss? I don't know what to do. And then you tell yourself, I'll figure out a way. And then your negative thought is, but what if you can't? And you end up having this debate. What I'd like you to envision is you're walking down a road. The road represents the journey of your life. And on this side of the road, you have all the negative thoughts, the regrets from the past, the worries about the future. And on this side of the road, you have the positive thoughts, the hopeful thoughts. The problem is not that the positive thoughts don't work. The problem is the debate, the back and the forth, that drains you of energy and drains you of optimism. So if you take not what's on the left side and not what's on the right side, but you walk the middle path. And that's the first thing I want you to do. Embrace the middle path. And you allow the negative and the positive to coexist, but peacefully, without the debate. Because you have this war inside your head. And what's the first thing you want to do if you stop a war? You have to have a ceasefire. So you no longer have the debate. You have this thought that you accept, a negative thought. You have this thought that you accept, it's a positive thought. Let them peacefully coexist without the debate. And you will discover over time that many of the negative thoughts start to dissipate on their own. You don't have to force them out. That's the first thing to do. The second thing to do is, while you're walking that middle path, is to embrace acceptance. And acceptance means You're going to accept the way things are, the way things have turned out, rather than fighting for the way things that you wish they could be when they can't. When we accept things as they are, we stop the fight. We stop the inner battle. And when we accept things as they are, one of the most important things to accept is to accept uncertainty, because you can't figure out the future. People who are very, very worried overthink, and they try to reduce uncertainty. They try to figure out what can happen, how am I going to handle this problem, how am I going to handle this problem, what if I can't, then what's my plan B? And they're trying to reduce uncertainty, but they can't, and it causes more stress. If you accept uncertainty and embrace it, what you're doing is you are allowing for other insights to come forth. Because when you're not accepting uncertainty, you're fighting it, your own ego gets in the way. But when you step back and you accept reality as it is, and you accept the uncertain future that you can't change, that you can't do anything about yet, you allow for other insights to take place. The third thing to do is to accept or to embrace the higher virtues and attitudes that we all consider to be the most positive and inspiring. And those are the ones I mentioned before: hope, faith, trust, gratitude, love, peace, joy, awe, forgiveness, compassion, gratitude. When you can do that, you are stepping into that stream, that current that will take you where you need to go. About 9 months after my nephew Tony passed away, his dad was raking leaves. It was the month of November. And in the leaves, he found a little leather dress shoe that had belonged to Tony, and obviously it had fallen off his foot at one point in time and had gotten lost. But there it was, 9 months later. Now, it was kind of a bittersweet moment, right? It makes them remember that, oh, Tony's not here. But they looked at that shoe, and they went into that higher level current of energy and saw it as a gift. And they became very, very grateful for that little gift. And that helped them because it was the holiday season, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and they were able to embrace those higher virtues. And it gave them hope that somehow Tony was around, somehow Tony was trying to give them a message. And when you can embrace those higher virtues like that, you can begin to stay in that current, that energy current, and one higher virtue leads to the other. The more trusting you are, then the more grateful you'll be. The more compassionate you are, the more hopeful you can be. The last thing to embrace is grace. What is grace? It's the gifts that we get, unexpected, the things that seem to fall into place, the timely synchronicities that make us feel like, you know, there's somebody working behind the scenes of my life to help me out. The story I want to tell you is that 40 years after Tony passed away, my sister was now living across the country in Seattle, but she wanted to visit the East Coast. And she was going to be staying in Vermont with a family friend, a guy named Ted. Now, my sister had long been divorced. She and her husband divorced maybe 15 years after Tony passed away. They sold their house. They downsized. My sister was in various apartments. But now she was coming to visit the East Coast, and my wife and I decided to visit her while she was in Vermont. And when we got there, it also happened to be a time when my oldest son was leaving home to be in his first apartment. Now, Ted, my sister's friend, had owned apartment buildings, and he had this large warehouse filled with old furniture that he had used to furnish those apartments. And he said to us, hey, if your son is moving into an apartment, go into the warehouse, take whatever you need, whatever you think he might use. I said, oh, that's great. So we went in there. We spent about an hour. There was a lot of furniture, much of it kind of old, some broken, some we couldn't fit into our car, some we knew that our son didn't need. And after about an hour, underneath a whole lot of furniture, chairs, I found this little end table or a nightstand. And I pulled it out, I dusted it off. It seemed very sturdy. I opened the drawer. It worked fine. And we took it outside. And my sister looked at it, and she put her hand on it, and she said, I used to own that way, way back when she was married. But after they sold the house and downsized, she got rid of some of her furniture, gave some away, sold some, and a couple of pieces went to Ted. And here it was, 40 years later, and I was choosing that one particular piece. And I thought it was amazing that of all the pieces of furniture, I would do that. Well, a few weeks later, my son's getting ready to move. So I grabbed the end table, I picked it up, started to move it, and I noticed there was a rattling sound inside. Curious, I opened the drawer, I reached in, and I pulled out a shoe, a little leather dress shoe that had belonged to my nephew. Now, my sister had thought it was gone forever. It had been misplaced. So I called her up. She was back in Seattle, and we sent the shoe to her. It was a special delivery, if there ever was one. And that, to me, is a good indication of how to embrace grace, because those kinds of things will happen. And when you embrace grace, they happen even more. One last thing to keep in mind. Your suffering need not break your spirit, but your spirit can indeed break your suffering. I'm Dr. Paul Coleman. Thank you so much for watching.